Hello and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Dave Kelly, Director of Advanced Media Production at Cal State Long Beach. Today we're going to talk about how you can become your authentic self in the workplace. My guest today is Dr. Brenda Freshman. Dr. Freshman is an Associate Professor in Healthcare Administration, and she is also the Research Director at the Uclea Center for Ethical Leadership. Welcome, Brenda, and thank you for joining us on Talking Points.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're talking about the authentic self. The viewers already are saying, what does that mean? So let's start by describing what we mean by the authentic self and how does it manifest itself?
Well, authenticity is a concept that has been discussed by a variety of authors in a variety of disciplines, but as an organizational psychologist, which is my discipline, I approach it in terms of workplace communication. So I'm speaking more specifically about managerial authenticity. What it is a set of skills that when applied to communication in the workplace can enhance productivity and morale through increases in trust and employee engagement.
And what are some of those skills that we're going to be talking about?
Well, that's a great question because it's actually 4 specific skills that I'm investigating with respect to authentic workplace communication. The first one is confidence, an individual's self-assuredness, something that actually people can feel when they speak to you. The second is the concept of mindful awareness, being ever present in the moment, aware of your physical, mental, emotional states, and how that is playing out in the particular circumstance. So it's really about being here now with a level of self-awareness. The third construct is values alignment. So do I walk my talk? Do I practice what I preach? And finally, consistency, which is eminently important in the workplace. Am I reliable? Am I dependable? Do I treat people fairly and consistently across the board? Or, on the other hand, do I favor some and are harsher on others? That would be not consistent.
Well, if I'm a manager and I've established a pattern of relationships in the department and I'm deciding that I'm going to be more authentic, I'm going to be more of the real me, and that really means being true to myself, because a lot of this goes to being true to ourselves, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But if I start to roll this out at the next staff meeting, and this is new to my people, and maybe I'm a little over-exuberant in the process, are they going to be suspicious that something's going on, that I'm trying to gain some advantage, or I'm trying to do something that they're not aware of?
Well, it's a good question, but in my perspective, it's unlikely to happen that way because we approach managerial authenticity as a skill that's developed over time. So if you're not very skilled at it, it's unlikely that you're going to change dramatically overnight. So employees might notice that you're a little better listener, they see a little bit more confidence, but I seriously doubt that there's going to be big jumps or changes immediately. Something that occurs over time and much more subtle.
So it will roll out sort of at an even pace on its own if we just let it play out the way it should.
Well, yes, but you can't just let it. I mean, it's a skill that you have to practice. So just like any skill, you know, an individual have to consciously engage to bring themselves authentically present in the moment. But yes, over time, one will get better and better at it. It'll become more and more natural. So just like learning how to play the piano or learning how to serve in tennis, we have to practice really intensely with kind of willful consideration in the beginning. But over time, it becomes more and more our new habit, our new way of being.
When you say being in the moment and being mindful, what are some of the particulars of that? How can I be more in the moment and more mindful of what's going on around me? Let's say I'm having a bad day. How do I factor that into the equation as well?
Excellent. Well, there's 2 approaches to developing your mindfulness. One is over time, it's kind of like going to the gym, doing practices that will help you gain more composure and more regulation over your thoughts and your feelings. I like to look at it as taking dominion over your mind. So a practice like meditation, for example, is like going to the gym for your mindfulness skill. So if you practice meditation or some type of focused concentration where you're continually needing to reshift your focus, that develops that skill. So that's one thing that you do over time. But there's things that you do in the moment. Okay, so here we are in the moment, and my buttons have been pushed. I notice that I am not feeling happy, I'm uncomfortable, and I'm about to react in a way that is going to damage the situation. So the step one is I have to be aware of that. I have to notice that I'm off center. Step two is I have to tell myself I have choices. I have to understand that I can either react, which I can do, I can make that choice, or I can choose to respond. So once I decide, you know, I'm not going to go with my reaction, I'm going to go with a response, then I have to come up with menu choices. If I do this, this will be the consequence. If I do this, this will be the consequence. If I do this, this will be the consequence. Then I choose my choice based on what I'd like to have happen, then I act accordingly. Now, all that took a lot longer for me to describe than it actually happens in practice once you've got the skill under your belt.
Well, if we talk about working with our employees and working with coworkers in a way that's mutually respectful, there are going to be times when, for various reasons, I can't tell that person next to me what I really think. And sometimes discretion or discernment is the better choice. And you can call this whatever you like, holding cards close to your vest, or silence is golden. But aren't there times when serving the greater good means I hold back on my opinion?
So are you asking the question, I'm hearing the question is like, is there a time I can be too honest? Is there a time I can be too authentic when that might be inappropriate? And so if you understand, as we learn the skill, we understand that it's in alignment with our values, right? And the way we want to be. So to the extent that you're actually doing the skill, that doesn't happen because you take into consideration the outcome, the context, the relationship. So I consider then, what is it that I'd really like to do? So, for example, if my girlfriend asks me, how do I look in this dress? Do I really tell her she looks fat and horrible? No, I'm going to say maybe that's not the best dress for you. Right.
Okay, all right. So it's, again, thinking about the response before giving what might be at the top of your mind, but you have to process. Process is important.
Exactly. I think the key here is bringing our previously unconscious reactions into conscious response.
Okay, well, let's talk a moment about cynicism, because there's a lot of cynicism today in our country. Let's face it, with politics being the way they are, a lot of people are unhappy with politicians and politics. A lot of people are unhappy with the government for one reason or another. A lot of folks today are cynical because they believe they're not being told the truth about anything by either large corporate interests or by the large corporate media, which seems to have its own agenda or agendas. So that being the case, that cynicism, of course, is going to, at times, envelope the workplace as well. So how do we break through cynicism to show that, no, we are being genuine, we are telling the truth, and we really do have the best interests of the group in mind?
Well, I'm going to answer that question in two ways, okay? If we keep in mind that this is an individual skill to be developed, then it's the individual who's engaging in that, and the cynicism outside world, the distrust, I'm not sure how much that plays into it in terms of me choosing to be authentic. Now, in terms of the people that I'm working with, if I'm on a team and I happen to be paired with someone who's very cynical or very distrustful of authority, it's over time, that's the consistency part of the skill, it's over time they'll learn to trust me and will establish a rapport. Now, if they're so cynical, I can't break through that wall, then they're probably not a very good team member. I would certainly encourage progressive discipline and that respect, and they would need to be counseled and trained and given the opportunity to change and open up a little bit. And if they're not capable of doing that, then perhaps this isn't the right job for them.
Well, we've been talking about the reaction of others to how we are changing and becoming more authentic in the way we present ourselves. But it seems to me that we shouldn't just focus on how others perceive us or how others react to us, because ultimately this is about individuals becoming authentic for themselves. In other words, to thine own self be true. What are some of the benefits of the personal benefits that people will realize if they do become more authentic in this way?
Well, that's a great question, Dave. Each one of these 4 skills, confidence, values alignment, mindful awareness, and consistency, have been researched and documented by other investigators of the positive benefits of developing these skills. But let's look at just something like mindful awareness, which has been proven time and time again to increase attention, focus, memory, and has health and well-being benefits. For your viewers, if they'd like to investigate this further, I encourage them to look up UCLA Mindful Awareness Research Center, which has an excellent website online that will provide them a plethora of research documentation on the benefits for the individual.
And when you say health and well-being, we're talking about it's helpful mentally and psychologically as well as physically. Will you feel better physically if you're doing these sorts of things?
Yes, well, mindful awareness has been shown to be related to lower levels of stress and anxiety, which then that in itself has all kinds of health benefits. Also, values and alignment. Research indicates that when you walk your talk, you're more connected to your personal fulfillment and you have greater job satisfaction to the extent that you can manifest that alignment of values in the workplace.
All right, well, let's say that I believe everything you've said and everything you're telling me so far, but you know, I know myself, and to thine own self be true again. I know I'm kind of lazy. I like to go home and sit on the couch and watch TV and eat the potato chips or whatever it is, and I like to, you know, kind of stay in my own little comfort zone. You're asking me to get outside of my comfort zone a little bit here. What do I have to give up to get better? Because you don't become a marathon runner overnight. You don't become a doctor or a lawyer overnight. There's training, there's application of skill, and there's dedication and so on. So what do I have to give up? And as I say, no pain, no gain. What is it in this case?
Well, let's start with the no pain, no gain. Yes, you absolutely have to want to change. You have to have a willingness to engage with focused attention to change your behavior. So there's discipline involved. What you give up is your old way of being. If you practice the skills enough, you will have new habits and a new way of being.
Okay, well, we're just about ready for a break, but in 30 seconds or less, I know you teach these courses for students. What are the reactions of the students typically?
Well, the reactions of the students that I hear from have been 100% positive because they're the ones that have engaged and learned the skills. I particularly enjoy when alumni come back and speak to me after 10 years of practicing and developing these skills in their work and personal life. I've heard great feedback in that regard, and they are eminently grateful. I'm sure there's people out there who aren't buying the soap that I'm selling, who don't engage, but quite frankly, they don't report to me.
Okay, well, on that note, we're going to go to a break. Stay with us. In the second half, we're going to talk about how the authentic self and this movement toward being more authentic relates to things like the human potential movement of the past. Stay with us.
Get involved. Become a leader in the well-being of our nation, actively lending your voice and energy to promote wellness. Be the voice for public education and health education in schools, community organizations, hospitals, and clinics. You can become part of this exciting field with a degree from Cal State Long Beach.
Hello and welcome back to Talking Points. I'm Dave Kelly. My guest today is Dr. Brenda Freshman, and we're talking about becoming your authentic self. And Brenda, before we went to the break, we had talked extensively about how beneficial this is to be more authentic, to practice some of these skills that you're teaching students and also talking to alumni about. And one of the things I want to go into right now is some of the concerns that many of our viewers may have, and that is they may be watching this and saying, well, gee, that sounds good in theory and I wish it would work for me, but those folks on television that are talking about this, they just don't understand the kind of environment that I have to work in. I mean, all those backstabbers and those two-faced crazy people that I have to deal with every day, I just don't know if I could be vulnerable enough to do what they're talking about. How do you respond to that? Mm-hmm.
Well, it is unfortunate that there's a lot of bad behavior still in the workplace. I mean, there is good behavior, but there's also bad behavior. So to individuals who want to practice and engage in this skill, I say, first, try it. Don't believe what I'm saying. Try it and see what happens. You might very well be the light that instigates change in your workplace. If you are the one that really stands out with authentic presence and communication, people are going to want to naturally gravitate to you, because authentic presence is a skill that people feel. I express it as an authentic communicator, but you feel it while we're talking and while we're having our conversation. So that could be a positive force.
So what I'm hearing you say is that we may not realize it, but we could be the catalyst for change throughout that organization. It starts with one pebble that goes into the pond, and there's the ripple, and the ripple spreads. Are we talking along those lines?
Absolutely talking along those lines. And it's also the way I, as an individual, frame it and my expectations about myself in the workplace. I mean, there's a saying, it's not my saying, but the issue is how you relate to the issue. So it's how I approach people in the workplace and what my expectations are. I will get what I expect. So if I expect people to backstab and be distrustful, I'm going to be looking out for that. That's more likely that I'll experience it. If I expect positive communication with authenticity and alignment with my own values and the values of the organization that I agree with, then I will be getting more of that behavior from them. But really, this is a skill that needs to be tried and experienced to really be believed if it works.
And it's possible, as you said a moment ago, that people are just looking for that leader, that bold person to take that first step forward, and then you'd be surprised how many people might actually follow along.
Yes, I find that there's quite a void of skilled leadership in the workplace. And so I train people to be managers and leaders in healthcare. And this is why I feel this skill is so valuable, because people who are authentically present, they get listened to, they are trusted, employees are more engaged, and they become either the formal or the informal leaders in the organization.
And when we talked about this before the program, you had told me that, you know, one of the aspects of this that people don't realize is that as folks become more authentic and more genuine, it actually increases their power, increases their strength, not in a overbearing way, but in a very positive way, that all of a sudden you, the person that has become more authentic, or at least has revealed more authenticity, now have also become perceived as somebody who's a strong force, again, on the positive side in that organization.
Yes, because it's, I'd say, influence rather than force. And it's much more subtle, but everyone, I think your viewing audience can relate to this when I say, when you're in front of someone who's authentically present, you can feel them. It naturally builds a rapport. It's not like I'm forcing you or pushing you to do anything. Because I'm authentically present, you genuinely are interested and want to listen to what I have to say. See, so it's different. It's not a forcing, it's an engagement. It's getting a buy-in with genuine curiosity, interest, and trusted engagement.
And so when we talk about communication in that way, it really means that we do have to become a little bit more vulnerable at times. We have to drop our guard. We may have to drop some of our preconceived notions, and we really need to go in with more of an open mind.
We have to be willing to be real. We have to be willing to be real. But remember, confidence is a part of this. So that's why the confidence aspect of this skill set is so important, because in order for me to be real and allow myself to be vulnerable, as you say, I have to have the confidence in myself that I'm doing the right thing and that I could withstand this vulnerability. When I'm confident in what I'm doing, I don't feel the vulnerability as a negative. I feel it as a positive, an opportunity to be real with you, which increases our connection.
And we have to put some parameters around this, because we can't be so open and so willing to listen to everyone that we become, you know, with the open door policy that we all have today, spend all day counseling people who come in with their troubles, because I'm now perceived as a person who listens to everyone's troubles. So we have to put some parameters around it. How do we negotiate that part of it?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I think you're speaking about managing your boundaries, which is another but yet important and related skill. So as I become more and more trusted in the workplace, will people run to me with all their problems, and will that become problematic for me? If that's the case, then I need to appropriately manage my boundaries, which I think is even another example of demonstrating the skill, enacting the skill, because remember, it's confidence, consistency, values alignment, and mindful awareness. So if I'm mindfully aware that people are running to me inappropriately with their problems, then my authentic communication is going to be able to deal with that appropriately.
And when you say values alignment, I guess in that context it's appropriate to share what our values are.
Yes, I think I need to first understand what my values are and then let people know. But you could certainly do that, but it's more meaningful to act your values, to behave and align with your values.
So how much is walk the walk and talk the talk, and a combination of all of that?
Well, it is a combination of all of that. I mean, in order to understand what my values are, I have to be self-aware. In order to behave along those lines, I need to be self-aware when I'm in values alignment and when I'm out, and I have to have the willingness. Remember, we talked about the several steps before, the willingness to align my behavior with my values. So that's why the skill of managerial authenticity or authentic self in the workplace is a combination of these 4 skills.
Well, clearly we have to start with ourselves, because we can't control everything. We can't control what goes on in Washington, D.C. or on Wall Street. We can't even control really what our local city council might do at any given point in time. So we have to really start with ourselves, work on ourselves, and then move out from there and hope that we do influence people in a positive way. Mm-hmm. And what do you think about that idea of starting with ourselves first and not forgetting about the outside world, but really taking an inventory of who we are?
Well, actually, I think that's the good news. The good news is because the place where we have the most leverage is ourselves. You're absolutely right. I mean, how successful are we ever at trying to change another person? Not usually very, no matter how much we push or pull or prod, right? But we have dominion over ourselves. And to the extent that we can connect with our highest selves and act from that place, that's what we're going to get back from the world.
Well, let's talk about the world and how the world has reacted to these kinds of initiatives over time. Now, it actually started back in the 1940s with Abraham Maslow, who came up with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in the hierarchy of needs, the top of that pyramid was self-actualization. Mm-hmm. And people have written and talked a lot about what self-actualization means. He later then sort of evolved that concept to mean self-transcendence, because he realized that self-actualization didn't incorporate enough of the sort of charitable aspect of humanity that's also important. So how does being the authentic self correlate with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if at all? And what about the self-actualization, self-transcendence part of it? Do they correlate?
Well, Maslow presented his hierarchy in terms of these specific needs will lead to your motivation, right? And you speak of self-actualization of being the apex, the highest order need, which Maslow defined as meaning of life, life meaning. That was what his definition of higher order need is. Just for a moment, I just feel compelled to say that that happens to be culturally biased, but once I've said that, since we're here in North America, it is a North American value, and we'll just proceed from there. So in terms of its relationship to this skill set, I think that for those who want to achieve self-actualization, who want to be more self-actualized, the skill of authentic communication would be very valuable, because it's inviting them to be more self-aware with what their higher order needs are and to act in alignment accordingly. So I think managerial authenticity could be helpful for someone who is pursuing self-actualization.
And after Maslow's hierarchy of needs came the human potential movement. It actually sprang from a lot of what Maslow was talking about. And the human potential movement came about in the 1960s, mm-hmm. and it was described by many folks at the time as a rebellion, a counterculture rebellion against traditional psychology and organized religion in the traditional way. And so it was a kind of philosophical practice that involved a set of values and included things such as vegetarianism, such as the peace movement, such as the anti-nuclear movement. They also incorporated meditation and yoga and sort of humanistic evolution as part of that. So does the authentic self have a place at the table in that human potential movement?
Well, I think it certainly has a place at the table to the extent that people want to be more self-aware and more authentically communicate. But I think the distinctions between the human potential movement and what I'm talking about is I'm talking about a specific skill set for individuals to learn to improve and enhance their workplace communication. It's a skill set, it's not a movement. So all those other things like the values of vegetarianism and the rebellion against society, those are outside of the boundaries of what I'm speaking about.
And so we're really focused today on how this can affect us directly, practically, in the workplace in particular, and more or less change the way we've been doing things, and again, in a positive direction, and refocus that energy so it goes in the way that's most beneficial to me and to everybody around me.
Yes, and focused at the level of the individual. What we're talking about is giving individuals an opportunity to be more in alignment with who they are, connect to their higher values, and act from that place. That's the opportunity.
All right, we only have about 30 seconds left. Since we started talking about the human potential movement, I just want to ask one more thing, and you've only got 30 seconds to respond. And that is, you know, people have taken these various kinds of training applications such as EST, which is no longer called EST. There was another one called LifeSpring. These were trainings where people would go away for weekends with, there was usually some deprivation involved, and there was a group leader, and there was purging of negative thoughts and so on. Some people thought it was almost like a cult. Other people thought it was very helpful and beneficial. So is this anything at all connected to that? Again, 30 seconds.
No, I think this is quite distinct from that. Doesn't require any deprivation. It only requires focused intention and practice.
Very well. This has been a terrific conversation. I want to thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Talking Points. Join us again soon for the next edition. Until then, I'm Dave Kelly. Have a nice day.